If you all want to see something cool, stay tuned, because this month we go from a chainsaw milled slab to a modern live edge desk. I'll walk you through the whole woodworking journey from chainsaw milling to finishing. So let's get to it. And if you really enjoy the sound of my monotone voice, amateur cinematography, or my general lack of direction with my tangents, drill that like button and subscribe. And if you're really feeling lippy, feel free to leave a comment. Another woodworking YouTuber. I know. We are a dime a dozen in 2024. So why me? Why this show? Well, honestly, I'm just a guy in a one-car garage with a terrible sense of humor, but a growing interest in design. Kind of like Van Gogh, but instead of sacrificing my ear, I'm sacrificing my dignity publicly, which is debatably worse. Far, far worse. All I can tell you is that I love what I do in this garage, and I'm going to continue to push the limits and trying new things to keep us all entertained. So stay tuned. The journey of this project begins with a log I milled in 2021 that I unfortunately did not have any footage for, as this was before my YouTubing days. At the time, it was my largest mill and it maxed out my 36-inch bar on the chainsaw. This was out in Las Cruces, so whatever tools I had out there, I had to work with. Because the log was so large, I ultimately had to freestyle mill the remainder of the log because it was just too large. So the slabs came out like a true product of an amateur, uneven, unsymmetrical, and the stack was simply unpleasing to the eye. But I couldn't let these beauties go to waste, so here we are paying for it a couple years later. Little did I know this thing had seen so much action throughout its days, as it was riddled with metals. I discovered 3 of these guys and failed to discover a 4th, as you will see later. Prep for surgery, doc, because it's about to get messy. I briefly discussed this in my last episode. The need to get a metal detector. I did finally order one and it is en route, but what I had to do in the meantime was use a stud finder on the metal setting, which worked out okay. So when I source wood from a professional supplier, I tend not to have this issue, but I only source the wood that I cannot get myself here in the Southwest, like walnut, for example. Mulberry, on the other hand, these were homegrown here in the Southwest, and it seems like more often than not, I am hitting metal. So metal detection has officially been added to my sequence of events in these videos. Fortunately, through acts of desperation, I was able to get them out, but at cosmetic cost. That being said, I really need to research a more efficient way to do this because these were some tough nails. Get it? It is nice to maintain the integrity of the entire slab as much as possible. There were simply too many nails and they had to be removed. This thing was a mess, as you can see. But call me Shallow Hal, I saw the beauty and I couldn't let it go. So we start prepping to plane. We had to chainsaw the oversized slab to get it within workable dimensions for my tools, so we trim some off the perimeter. These little chunks become great stabilizers for chainsaw milling, or when they split, they're great for firewood, but I digress. Once the perimeter has been cleaned up, we begin power planing some off the top. The purpose of this is to get the slab to fit within the capabilities of my router sled, which at max capacity with lifts can tolerate about a 4-inch slab. Ideally, the surface of the desk for my younger son only needs to be about 2 inches in thickness because I don't need it to be that heavy. So we will have a lot of work ahead of us shedding off those 2 inches. You forgot Valentine's Day, didn't you? So this is by far the largest slab I've ever planed. So I knew this was going to take some extra time and attention. Not to mention, this is one of the thickest slabs I've ever worked with. So this is going to be some work. There are a couple things going through my head at this point. 1, did my prep to plane create a flat enough surface that this thing will not wobble too much on the sled? 2, does this clear the Z-axis capabilities of the sled? And 3, am I maintaining the proper thickness at this phase? So in summary, these are all the things I'm thinking about while I unfortunately push my router too hard. In a moment here, you can see the smoke coming off this thing. Essentially, like any tool, this thing has its capabilities and limitations. Because of the diameter of the bit I was using, I cannot plane too deep as it overwhelms the tool. Tough lesson, but we let her cool off, run some checks to make sure it's still good to go, and continue on. Because this thing was beyond the capabilities of my sled, we had to power plane a little off the edges. But moving on, I briefly discussed last month that I want to give this thing some time to get the mood swing out of its system. Moisture content is a menace, and particularly the thinner you go, the more of a menace it becomes. I've noticed it more dramatically with softer woods more than harder woods, but it does still happen. So I try to keep my slabs at least 2 inches thick, because it seems like anything less than that, I tend to have more dramatic behavior. So the goal is to get the slab down to around 2 inches, but I want to leave about half an inch to see how the slab reacts after that first plane. If it doesn't appear like there's any movement, I will advance planing efforts to that 2 to 2.25 inch end state. Off to the Walnut Supplier. The border is such an interesting place. As you can see, Mexico is literally right there on the horizon. The Southwest has its own beauty, and El Paso or El Chuco has its own charm. Now, this guy has a massive collection of woods from all over the world. I've been able to get bloodwood, purple heart, zebra wood, and the list goes on. It's a cool experience. Believe it or not, the Rio Grande, although dry most of the time, has allowed an array of trees to flourish down here, mostly pecan, mulberry, and pine. I absolutely hate buying wood, but I have a growing irresistible attraction to that dark walnut as it perfectly contrasts my mulberry collection. Oh Lord, looks like I'm gonna have to build another desk. That being said, this 2001 Honda Accord pickup truck is the best investment I have ever made. She just won't die. At this point, I really need to sit down and sketch out how we're going to do this thing. I wanted to make something modern, a modern desk with a chair, but the chair was overly ambitious as I could barely finish the desk on time this month. So we will do the chair next month. I wanted some angled legs, and I wanted those made out of walnut to contrast the lighter yellow hue of the mulberry surface. A floating drawer, and some gold trim, as this has officially made its way into my themed palette or style of design. I also wanted to make a really cool modern lamp, which I unfortunately only had time to create a sloppy prototype for, but we'll get to see at the end of this episode. I will follow up with the finished design on my Marini Furniture Shorts channel, so tune into that if you get bored. The limitations of being a small-time woodworker / furniture designer has its challenges. You probably noticed the landscape of sawdust in my garage, not to be mistaken for a giant hamster cage. My breakers are going off all the time, so I have to vacuum after I run my tools, which is obviously a bit of an inconvenience, but the struggle makes the man. I've learned to be grateful until I can upgrade my capabilities. As my skills slowly come back to me, I feel like I'm developing a theme, at least for my larger or signature pieces. Mulberry, walnut, and gold trim. This is where I'm at, and I really like it. So I'm going to go with it, at least for this year, and then we'll reevaluate from there. I've never really liked being in a box, but in this case, I feel like it's a good thing. But mentally prepare yourselves. Sometimes I get bored and itchy, and next thing you know, it's Jackson Pollock phase. So if the leash comes off, let the dog run around for a little bit. I promise he'll come back home. I cannot remember the last time I made table legs. I think I was literally 19 or 20 years old, which was about 19 years ago. You know, before smartphones and Yeti cups. Last month was a great warm-up with the support system for the floating shelf, but this month I was going to have to commit. I was debating on the thickness of the legs and ultimately felt like I maybe should have gone a little bit thicker, but for the sake of an attempt at a modern design, I was willing to take the risk on the thinner set. Which I guess is the luxury of being in the position I'm in. I get to take those risks without reporting to anybody. Except my wife. Okay, scratch that entirely. I guess everybody reports to somebody. So once I get all those symmetrical and exactly the same dimensions, we get an accurate measurement for our CNC pocket. I'm not sure if I will continue creating CNC pockets in my slabs as opposed to using screws, but in this episode I continue that effort with the intent of extra stability without any screws at all. This project is really pushing my limits in a lot of ways, and you'll see some of those limitations were pushed more than others. And not every one of those efforts came out the way I would have wanted, but the experience is truly priceless. Pushing forward, I'm not sure if I've ever made a drawer, and to classify something as a desk instead of a table, it must have one. So here we are dimensioning some more of this walnut to make that drawer. Now, to stick to this modern theme vision, I wanted to commit to a floating drawer. I have noticed this is becoming a trend with modern desks and figured, let's give it a go. My concern with the whole project is sturdiness, as nobody likes a wobbly table. So the way I designed the drawer into the desk was to supplement the sturdiness of the project as a whole. I designed the drawer to slide up the leg and also be secured in place with 2 additional pieces of walnut, which will later be accented with gold. Now that we let the slab rest for some time, I will take a look with my level to see if there's been any movement. Fortunately, everything looks good, so we prepared a plane down to the 2 to 2¼ inch thickness. We removed the rails so that the bit can reach and begin our execution. The thing with slabs is you really notice the difference in weight between 2 inches, 3 inches, and 4 inches. In this case, because the desk is for my son and the legs, although made out of walnut, are relatively thin, I don't want that much stress on them. So getting close to that 2-inch thick dimension will really help bring the weight down. Also cosmetically, I think it's more pleasing to have the thickness of the slab relatively identical to the thickness of the legs. I think the whole project just looks right with that kept in mind. This slab has been a tough fight, but it is starting to come together. We need to get Cinderella ready for the ball. I start removing the bark off the sides in preparation for sanding the edges to get that nice, smooth surface. This also allows us to identify where we're going to need to add some glue or support to prevent the slab from splitting. Don't get me wrong, I love live edges, but sometimes it feels like there's a little too much chaos and not enough order. I've spoken about this before, and many may disagree, especially radical artists. But I feel like there needs to be some order to the chaos, but maybe it's just personal preference. In other words, lately the live edges I've enjoyed the most have only remained on one side of the project. So I square off the desktop on 3 sides and leave the live edge on the working side of the desk. I think it's perfect ratio of chaos and order. CNC is a love that grows over time. When you don't know what you're doing, it is extremely frustrating because it has its technicalities, both mechanically and digitally. But the love grows over time, I promise. In this scenario, I had to make a minor mechanical modification as the wear and tear over time takes a toll on certain parts. This will allow me to CNC on this slab, which is over 2 inches thick, so that the legs can fit snugly on the underside without any screws. So as you know, I am notorious for pushing some limits, but in this case I went a little too far. After verifying the thickness measurements of the legs, I verified the location measurements so that we do not mess this up. Because messing something up at this point was such a tight deadline that yes, I did set myself, would be catastrophic. After those verifications are made, we execute with my finger on the abort button, just in case. Trust me, this is for the best. If you know, you know. The right angle leg CNC is relatively straightforward. Make sure the length and the width are good, and then set the depth accordingly. The angled legs, well, this was a first for me, and I was willing to take the risk. Unfortunately, after endless calculations, I just couldn't get the execution nearly as clean as I would have liked. So the CNC is a 3-axis machine, XYZ. For CNC joinery of this nature, I ideally would have needed a 4 to 5 axis machine to make this clean, or at least as clean as I would have imagined. I was able to make it work, but I had to hammer in some wedges with glue to make sure these legs would not buckle under pressure. If I had to give it a grade, I would give it a passing C, but the experience gained will be priceless on my next attempt. How I will do it, I'm not sure yet. maybe the old-fashioned way with a hammer and a chisel, or in combination with a mortise and tenon joint. The leg pockets are all good to go, and the underside is ready for some final preparations. We want to do this before we put the legs in place because the leg and shelf system is going to get relatively complicated fast. So I get out the disc sander again and sand out all those nasty divots from the router sled, which got me thinking it was probably time to replace the carbide inserts as the planing was looking a little sloppy. From there, we insert the legs when I realized I may have made a little bit of a mistake. Those tightly fit legs were put in before I had CNC'd the pockets to help hold the floating drawer in place. Fortunately, I was able to recover with some varsity level maneuver woodworking to get these squeezed in there. Ideally, I probably should have started gluing the top and bottom of the drawer a bit earlier, but you know, sometimes fatigue and procrastination gets the best of us. So as time is beginning to dwindle on me, I dimension these parts so that they are wide enough to operate as a functional drawer, all while taking into consideration that I want it to line up with the edge of the desk and have enough room to CNC a pocket to slide down the front right angle leg to partake in creating some added stability to the desk. Again, I want to prevent this desk from feeling flimsy or shaky, so we attempt to reinforce this vision as much as possible. After my glue dries, I properly size each of these pieces for the CNC effort before sliding on to the leg to assemble the entirety. Unfortunately, I was not able to technically make this a drawer because I ran out of time. It kind of evolved into a floating shelf assembly more than anything. In other words, a drawer does not slide out, it's just an empty pocket, at least for now. The good news is the wife loved the rendition, so I can't be too hard on myself. We begin to wrap up with some final touches, specifically sanding the desktop surface as cleanly as possible. I like to do this last for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes sanding can create uneven surfaces, and if I still needed CNC, it can slightly offset the foundation, in turn messing up the execution. Two, I have to move these pieces around so much, inevitably some minor damage or glue will impact the surface. So leaving this for last is more of a convenience than anything. After filling in those cracks and one final sand, we are ready for finishing. I like to drown my live edges in Pure Tung Oil. This will help seal the entire slab evenly, if that makes any sense. There will always be some movement with these, but sealing it from every side will help alleviate any dramatic movement. In other words, when it's sealed on all sides, if there is movement, it should, and I say should, react relatively evenly or moderately. So we drown it relentlessly. We make sure that the leg and drawer shelf also get their fair share. Pure Tung Oil polymerizes over time, which helps it create a water-resistant surface, but also hardens the wood. I've said it countless times before, I love Pure Tung Oil. It is truly a lost art form. That being said, if you have enjoyed the belligerence, drill the like and subscribe button, and feel free to let me know what you think. Things are going to get more exciting fast as I hone my skills, so I really appreciate your support and for watching. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the modern live edge desk with my lamp prototype. The theme is really starting to settle in with mulberry walnut combo and with gold trims for a special touch. I would have liked to go a little more modern with my design, but honestly, as I said, I had a time crunch this month, so such ambitions will have to wait until next month or one of our following months. So mistakes were made, but we were able to adapt and overcome and put these lessons in the pocket for the next round. I'm very grateful for you all tuning in. I truly hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, things are going to be pushed further and further every month from here on out, so be prepared for the wild ride ahead as I contemplate the possibility of building a brand beyond such simple entertainment. Thank you again. Thank you, subscribers. You guys rock. Until the 1st of next month, I'm out.